Welcome back, everyone. Hey, welcome to another Adventure Box podcast. So a long time ago, I had this phrase I would always say at the beginning of my videos because you were part of my community. So I'm going to go back to it and say, welcome back, HC Nation. Hey, Zach Edwards here with another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. This is brought to you by Historical Conquest. That is the H and C. Historical Conquest is a game that's based on just having fun, but where you can actually learn history while playing a really fun game. Plays like, or looks like, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, those kind of card games, but with a gameplay of Risk, where you're trying to take over the world using people from history to do so. So, here we go. Let's start talking about what we started talking about on Monday. This time we're going to be talking about immigration as part of the melting pot after 1840. Remember, by this time, there were no immigration laws. So everything that was actually, every rule about coming into the United States was basically come and set up shop. There was no laws. So this starts off, wait a second. For some reason, my computer's going weird. Give me 1 second. Technology is great when it works. Okay, so we are back. I know that wasn't really we didn't even know I was really gone, thanks to a pause button. But today we're focusing on one of the most important forces in the 19th century. Now, 19th century, remember, does not mean 1900. It means 1800s. I don't know why they do that, but the 19th century is basically everything before 1900. So 1800. So in the 19th century, or 1800s, America. And that is immigration. Today we're going to be talking about why millions of Europeans came to the Americas after 1840. Again, we were talking about the other one on Monday, why they came in before 1840. Especially, we're going to focus on the Irish, the Germans, Scandinavians. Now, we're not going to go into, at the same time, we have basically the coastal states up and running. We have some interior states up and running by this time. And we even have some forces over in California because people are moving that direction. So we're going to be talking a little bit about them as well, but we're really going to focus on the Europeans that came over during the 1840s and the immigration laws that are being established. Now let's talk about the second thing we're going to be talking about is how these immigrants contributed to building this nation. Building cities, farms, railroads, big thing, railroads, and also culture. And then the third thing we're going to be talking about is how, despite their contributions, they still, even after the 1840s, were shown prejudice, discrimination, and again, resistance to assimilate, and still found the way to thrive in the United States as the country of opportunity. So let's begin with why they came. Okay, why did they leave Europe? I think last time we talked about the English first. We're going to talk about the Irish. So during the around 1845 to about 1852, again, this is pre-Civil War. Around that time, the Irish experienced one of the most devastating famines in modern days. So they came over in ships because of this. Ooh, that looks pretty nasty. You know what that is? I mean, I could tell what it is because I know what it is. Can you tell what it is? That's a potato. Ooh, why in the world would this force so many Irish over to the Americas? Over 1 million people. So, why did that little thing that looks like a rock almost, but it is a potato. This is what happened to the potatoes in Ireland. It was called the Great Potato Famine. And it was from a change in the environment. And so because of this change of environment being overly saturated with water and not being able to produce the right way, this was a staple for millions. And so millions died because of this. And so it led to the immigration of nearly 2 million Irish. all moved over because of this little, not a vegetable, it's a starch. I guess it is a vegetable, grown in the ground. Anyways, so the Irish immigrants arrived in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Let me bring up that map so you can see it. So there's New York, there's Philadelphia, and up here is Boston. There's Boston. Yep, right there. So the Irish settlers came to these three ports. Why did they come here? Well, not Baltimore. Here you go, Philadelphia. Because they were looking for more opportunity. They literally could not survive in Ireland any longer. Not without the potatoes to be able to farm. I got another image for you. When it comes to this, this is what you would see normally with the Irish farming potatoes. You'd see them picking up potatoes right out of the ground. But after the famine, this is what you saw. People that were basically starving to death because they could not get a harvest of potatoes. And that's basically what they lived off of. Most of them were Catholic. Most of them were poor. And they were also unskilled laborers outside of agriculture. They faced harsh discrimination in the United States. Harsh. I mean, very bad. This is why, remember on Monday, I was talking about how they had groups that would come together and try to bring people together. If you were from Ireland, they had a group for you and would try to help you to assimilate or move into the United States. So they became a major part of what? The labor force inside the United States, because they would work for barely anything. And so they were working in the canals, they were working the railroads, city infrastructure, factories, anywhere they could get work. They were hard workers. They just weren't that skilled of workers. So for the Irish, America wasn't just a dream, it was a lifeline. It was the only way to survive. Let's go to the Germans. Now, in 1948, what happened in Germany? There was a great revolution in 1848. So Germany, during almost the exact same time as Ireland, saw this great revolution and a series of failed democratic uprisings, which basically led to Germans fleeing. So this was not the French, the French Revolution. Again, this is Germany, but a lot of the same types of things happened. As they were trying to get into a democracy, they had a lot of failures. And so many of them had to flee, especially those that supported certain parties that did not actually take root. These immigrants, called the 48ers. 48ers, because in 1848, were often educated. Why? Okay, so they're the opposite of the Irish. They were educated, politically active, and very skilled. They were artisans. They settled in the Midwest, in states like, or in cities like Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and even St. Louis. St. Louis, remember, I'm from Kansas City, other side of my state, of Missouri. And they brought with them the printing presses, beer making, and strong political ideas. The Germans also helped establish kindergartens. Wait, kindergartens? What? Yes, kindergartens. Music societies, and farming communities. Whoa! So we got like the Irish, very unskilled workers, very poor, very uneducated, coming over. And then you had the Germans who came over in droves and were well educated, politically savvy, and skilled, like the total opposites. So and this is why we call it the melting pot or the mixing pot. Okay, so the German legacy is still alive in the Midwest right now. I know because I'm in the Midwest. They brought with them bratwursts, beer halls, and even our school system. Well, that's not one that they really want to promote too much, because we've had questions about our education system and its struggles that it's having. But at the same time, I'm glad that they did come over with that, because it allowed for us to have a lot of different experiments of how to do schools. And that's what we've had over years. What's another group? The Scandinavians. I don't have an image for this, but they were known as the frontier builders between the 1850s and 1880s, around the same time as the Civil War, which they didn't want to live in the Civil War or fight in the Civil War. It wasn't technically their war. They moved west. They moved over to Minnesota and Wisconsin and Dakotas. So they were promised cheap land. Again, during the Civil War, they were running for the hills in the United States to another location outside of the conflict. Not because they didn't want to fight, well, maybe a little bit because they didn't want to fight, but also because they didn't see it as their war, even though they're becoming Americans. Many became successful farmers, and they transformed the Midwest's agriculture. That's great. They brought with them traditions such as cooperation. Wait a second. I think everyone had cooperation to some extent. No, remember, there's a lot of discrimination. So cooperation, Lutheran faith. Okay, so the Lutherans came a lot over with the Scandinavians. And community values. Well, wait a second. We had community values before then as well. But they did bring over different community values and a strong sense of family. So very much community oriented. So immigrant labor grew because of this. There's this huge influx of people. Like the Irish are coming in. The Germans, well, they were more in the agriculture and away from everyone. The Scandinavian, well, they were also way over in the Midwest, or further than the Midwest. Okay, so we had the Irish at least. Well, because of the Irish, we had a lot of immigration, or a lot of immigration labor. And so it grew. In the mid-1800s, the U.S. was growing rapidly, and the immigration labor was a very powerful force, we'll say. It was powering that growth. So the Irish workers that were working in the Erie Canal and many of the railroads. But it wasn't only them. Who else was working on the railroads? You have the Irish on one side, but remember, you have another set that's coming over from California. You have two railroads in the Transatlantic Railroad coming together. What was it? You're right, the Chinese immigrants around the late 1860s about. That would help build this transatlantic railroad connecting the East Coast with the West Coast and making trade a lot easier and boosting the economy greatly. Stuff that is over in California could get to New York, and New York to California. It was great. This was a great time to be alive. The cities, in cities, immigrants filled factories, brickyards, and docks. They were working everywhere possible. So if you wanted a laborer, you got your laborer. But what also happens during this time? That's right. It means some people are going to lose their spots, or they might have been paid fairly well before, but with all this immigration coming in, those people will work pennies on the dollar. So if you're a worker, your salary is going to go down dramatically. You're going to get affected by all this influx of immigrants that come in. In rural areas, though, they farmed new land and built homesteads. So they were growing west, more civilized areas. At the same time, remember, the more immigrants come in, the more they push the Native Americans out. So, and we've already been over that. That was 2 weeks ago. So we'll look back 2 weeks ago. Now, the American dream was being built. It was something that you could actually say, I want the American dream. Now, what was the American dream? What was the American dream? What is it for you right now? Let me ask you that. What is it for you right now? Is it to get a house, have a steady job, to make a good amount of money that you can have nice savings? Or is it to buy a luxury car? Or is it to buy whatever your neighbor has? Yeah, we in America, we love to say, oh, I like that. That's what someone else has. I want that. I want that. I want that. The problem is you can't have everything you want. So the American dream became, I want to survive. I want to thrive here. I want my house. I want my land. That's it. That's all I want. And I will do the rest. Well, I'll actually do everything I can to get it. They'd work by their hands. And that's how they'd make their American dream. They would do it on their own, by the hands of those who were not born here in the United States. That's who wanted the American dream, because those that had the American dream were those that were living here already. All those that were from other countries, they saw that and they wanted that as well. Whether it was freedom, whether it was economic opportunities. Remember, we talked about the push factor of why people immigrant, and the pull factor, pushing. I'm being forced out because of religious persecution, economics, or political reasons. Pulling is my opportunity. I want economic opportunity. I want religious freedom. I want, and I'm going to work for it. The push and the pull. So let's talk about building the nation itself. So immigrant labor, I should say, made it possible to expand America's economy. Factories all of a sudden started shooting up everywhere. But I have a picture for you. These are the people that worked in factories at that point. You're like, wait, those are kids. Yeah, those are kids. Sorry, I keep pointing in the wrong direction. Those are kids. My screen's over here, but this video shows it over there. Okay. A lot of people, a lot of the factory owners said, hey, we could pay top dollar for the adults, or, who's just as able to do it? The children. And if it's children, we don't have to pay as much. That's a little issue. So, before we get to this point, remember that the Irish and the German Catholics, they brought parishes, they brought schools, they brought hospitality. These are the contributions that they brought. The German, they brought beer breweries, founded newspapers, and introduced traditions, get this one, like the Christmas tree. Thank you, Germans. I like the Christmas tree. I will keep hanging up my Christmas tree every Christmas. It's a great sight. Even for the religious reasons. Okay, Scandinavians, what did they bring? They brought folk traditions, cooperative farming models, and music. Okay, not as big as the Germans and the Irish, but that's okay. Scandinavians, you can come on. Okay, now, a lot of times they contributed through food, holidays, religion, art, language. They basically reshaped the way America was living because they brought their culture in with them. So did those that were brought in with slavery. So did those that came over from China. So did those that came up from Mexico. This became the melting pot of all these different cultures, religions, ideas came together. And we created the American core. Now, here's the problem. If all of a sudden you have too much immigration, you will start to deteriorate the core that was created by all those immigrants before. And some would say, well, that's not a bad thing. Well, it is if you think that if you know history, every empire has fallen when they lost their core, when they turned against their core, when they started doing things that were not good for their society. That's their core. But remember this, without immigrants, America wouldn't just look different. It would taste different. It would sound different. It would just be different. So, but that is what created our core. Let's talk about expanding the future. Okay. As the U.S. pushed westward, immigrant families helped settle the frontier. They moved over to the west. Sad to say, they pushed out a lot of the Native Americans that were in that land, and they continue to grow. So, Homestead Act came into play. You got to read about that in the textbook. It basically gave land to all those willing to cultivate it. If you said, I want land and I'm going to farm it, they'd give you land in a lot of different places. Many immigrants took that opportunity. In states like Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota, whole towns formed around the immigrant groups, the Germans, the Scandinavians, and such. They built schools, churches, local governments, often keeping native languages alive for many generations. That's right, if they were Germans and they came into this town, you would still hear it years afterwards. But over time, it started to dwindle and it was all English. Now, this is an interesting thing because right now we have administration that actually made it so that we have the language of English as our native language. Yes, in the United States, English is now our native language. Wait, you're like, wait, it's always been that way. No, it actually has not. It has not been our native language. We haven't had a native language. Other countries have native languages. We have never had it. This administration said, we're having it. So now we have it. Okay, let's talk about tensions with the locals. Okay, this is interesting. What happens when you get a German immigrant and an Irish immigrant in the same room back then? Well, you've got two very strong characters. And if they don't like what you're saying, or there's a language barrier, or something else gets between them, oh, those guys are fighters. Both sides. The Irish were known for fighting. And so they had to live in basically like enclaves, groups, communities that were away from the other groups. So you had like Little Germany or the Irish Ward, which both protected and isolated them. That was hard. That was really hard. But over time, it soon dissolved and combined. So tensions with native-born Americans also flared up. And why? Again, I already said this. Jobs, language, religion, politics, all these things. That was the hardest thing for them to come together with, especially if the immigrants, or those that were immigrating into the United States, were taking the jobs of those that were naturally born in the Americas. So that would, I mean, there's no question, that would create a lot of tension between the groups. So for this reason, let's talk about nativism. Nativism, being a native to an area, or the Know-Nothing Party. So by the 1850s, nativism, being anti-immigrant sentiment, was on a rise. Before that point, they found ways of assimilating with each other. But in the 1850s, when the factories came out, there were jobs. Get more immigrants in, no jobs. Or your salary goes low because the immigrants will be paid very little in order to survive. Because all they wanted to do was come to America and survive until they can get their situation settled. This is when you get the Know-Nothing Party. Officially, the American Party, but it was also known as the Know-Nothing Party. It was called for strict immigration control and claimed to protect native Protestant values. So they especially targeted Irish and German Catholics, who they believed were loyal to the Pope and not the Constitution. So the Know-Nothing Party ran candidates who basically won elections and even pushed laws to delay naturalization. Again, it went from 2 years to 5 years. So it was one of the first organized backlashes against immigration. We think we have it bad now. It was so much worse back then. And it wouldn't be the last in their time. So let's talk about the discrimination and the legal barriers. Even inside of politics, immigrants faced legal and social discrimination inside the government, inside the politics. Irish immigrants were officially barred from jobs or even housing. No Irish need apply. Those were signs you could actually hang up. Think of doing that now, whoo-wee, for any nationality, any race or such. No, that would not be accepted now, but it was then. German Catholics were ridiculed in newspapers and cartoons. So the Germans brought over the newspapers, and they were ridiculed by their own newspapers. Interesting. Because remember, it was the Germans that brought the printing press over. You have language barriers and foreign customs that led to alienation in schools too, and let alone workplaces. So there's so much tension built up at this time. So we think we have it bad here. Oh, not even close to what they had it back then. I mean, literally, you could not survive if you were a certain nationality in certain places. So despite all these obstacles, though, immigrants didn't just survive. They organized. They thrived. They found, again, mentioned this before, they founded schools. They founded churches, mutual aid societies based around their own group. Well, this is a problem because this creates separatism, where you separate yourself from other groups. Segregation, not just between whites and blacks. This is Irish and Germans. This is German Protestants, German Catholics, so forth. And so there also was created ethnic newspapers, helping them basically stay connected to their former land and keep them informed. Over time, they built political parties through organizations. There's one group called the Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was an Irish Democrats in New York City, and the German social clubs. So they basically turned neighborhoods into networks, and those networks into power. This is all we're going to be talking about today. That's as far as we're going at this time. Once we get past the Civil War, we're going to be talking about the Reconstruction. And this is when you start seeing the melding, where they start coming back together. So let's talk about a little bit what we talked about already. Okay, first, immigration in the mid-1800s was about more than new arrivals. It was about rebuilding lives, reshaping a nation, redefining what it was meant to be an American. Okay, so what does this mean? The Irish, the Germans, the Scandinavians came seeking freedom, food, future, opportunities, and they found all of them through I was going to say without fighting. It was not without its fights. I'll just put it that way. They built farms. They were part of the railroad. They built churches, communities, and such, based around who they were as a group. And though they faced discrimination, they persisted and left an indelible mark in the United States, which means they help us create the core of what America is. Now, the problem is, people today want to destroy that core. And again, what happens when you destroy that core? The whole civilization collapses, which is why we actually have to keep our core values, which is loving others, accepting others for who they are, learning from others, growing from others, all these things. That's our core. What do you think, now this is your action item, action question, engagement question. What do you think was the most overlooked contribution immigrants brought or made during this time? Put in the comments below. I want to hear what you have to say. I would be interested to hear what you think people overlook, or maybe I have overlooked in talking about the contributions of immigrants during these days. When we get into the Industrial Revolution, we're going to talk more about these people in the factories. So not just these kids. Oh, you can't see that. But these kids and so forth. You're going to see a lot of factories with a lot of kids and also women, like factories with just women, because they didn't cost as much as men. And the children, because they didn't cost as much as the adults. So stay tuned for that. I can't wait to tell you more, but that's an Industrial Revolution. That is after we are done with the Civil War. And we'll cover all the Industrial Revolution from before the Civil War and after the Civil War. So thanks so much for joining us on this Adventure Box podcast, and we will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.